When King Charles III collapsed behind palace walls, the world saw only the aftermath. But the truth is far more chilling. The timeline of his illness, hidden, manipulated, lied about, was finally cracked open by a royal doctor too guilt-ridden to stay silent. What he revealed destroyed the illusion and exposed a trail of cover-ups that could destroy the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What happened that day was not a moment of weakness, not a passing spell, and certainly not the harmless episode the palace would later describe. The collapse occurred during a tightly controlled closed-door briefing inside Clarence House, a meeting meant to project stability to senior aides, not expose vulnerability. Instead, it did the opposite. Charles faltered mid-sentence, his words trailing off as panic rippled through the room. Chairs scraped, voices dropped, and for a few harrowing seconds, no one knew whether the king would rise again. This was not confusion. This was fear, raw, unfiltered, and instantly suppressed. Within minutes, the royal machine moved into action. Phones buzzed. Statements were drafted before doctors even finished their first assessments. The phrase was chosen carefully, almost casually, as if repetition could make it real. Fatigue, exhaustion, overwork. A king burdened by duty. It was a lie delivered with such confidence that it almost worked. Almost. Behind the scenes, senior physicians exchanged glances that said more than any press release ever could. This was not new, this was not sudden, and it was certainly not under control. As aides scrambled to contain the moment, one man watched in silence, his loyalty cracking under the weight of what he knew. A royal doctor, sworn to secrecy, had already seen the numbers, the dates, the altered files. He knew the public timeline was fiction. He knew the treatments being whispered about had failed long before anyone admitted it out loud. And most damning of all, he knew the collapse was not an anomaly, it was inevitable. The confidential document he would later leak did not suggest decline. It confirmed it, mapping months of deterioration that had been deliberately erased. Whispers began almost immediately, spreading through corridors that had heard centuries of secrets. This wasn't damage control. It was premeditated. A plan set in motion long before the collapse, designed to protect the crown at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing the truth. Those closest to Charles sensed it too. The tension, the rehearsed reassurances, the quiet urgency that followed him everywhere. This moment wasn't just a medical crisis. It was the first crack in a carefully constructed illusion, one the palace believed could hold forever. But the palace spin machine was already years ahead, laying the groundwork for a story that would unravel everything. Behind every royal curtain is a version of the truth. But this version, the one in the doctor's timeline, shows that King Charles's diagnosis wasn't sudden. It was systematic, planned, known. The dates don't match. The treatments were experimental, and worse, some never happened at all. The official timeline the palace fed to the press painted a portrait of recent concerns, isolated symptoms, and a king's resilience. But what the leaked documents unveiled was something far more deliberate. According to internal medical logs, Charles had been displaying key symptoms almost a year before the first public whisper of health issues. Subtle changes in speech patterns, coordination, and stamina were all flagged in internal memos stamped private circulation only. The deterioration wasn't new. It was documented, tracked, and most disturbingly withheld. Hidden deep within restricted files were clinical notations marked classified for senior eyes only. These were no ordinary reports. They referenced specialist meetings, emergency revisions to succession protocols, and most damning of all, a decision made months prior to publicly announce a much milder version of the king's actual condition. What the world was told was a recent medical concern was, in truth, a carefully edited narrative, a version scrubbed of its urgency, reworded to inspire calm, and timed to deflect scrutiny. Questions swirled around several unexplained trips Charles had taken under the guise of diplomatic engagements. But the doctor's timeline revealed that these weren't visits to foreign dignitaries. They were medical excursions. Private Swiss clinics, known for high-risk, unregulated procedures, had been visited multiple times. Some of the treatments trialed were not approved in the UK. These were not second opinions. They were acts of desperation from a monarch clinging to control, surrounded by advisors terrified of what a weakened king would mean for the institution. Among those disturbed by what they were seeing were members of Charles's own inner staff, footmen, aides, long-time personal secretaries. They noticed the shift before the tabloids did, the hesitation in movement, the fatigue hidden beneath forced smiles, and still they were ordered to maintain the facade. Loyalty was no longer about service, it had become silence, but perhaps the most haunting detail from the leaked timeline came not from doctors or aides, but from within the family itself. Queen Camilla, once poised and impenetrable, allegedly broke down when presented with the prognosis labelled irreversible. She had been present for every treatment, every hopeful promise, every delay, and in the end, none of it had changed the inevitable. Her grief, quiet and unseen by the public, became one of the few unvarnished truths in an operation built entirely on denial, and while the timeline revealed medical deception, the palace's decision to bury the truth had already taken a darker turn. The British monarchy doesn't just keep secrets, they manufacture realities. Operation White Veil was designed to preserve an image, but what it really did was rewrite a king's suffering into political theatre. Inside rooms where aides signed gag orders and doctors were silenced, the truth became a threat. What began as a simple PR strategy soon spiraled into something far more sinister. Buried within internal palace documents was a code name that would soon carry weight far beyond its pages: Operation White Veil. Its mission was clear: construct a narrative strong enough to withstand scrutiny, silence those who knew too much, and stage a version of the king that the public could believe in. Not the frail, fading man behind locked doors, but a sovereign still in command, untouched by illness, unshaken by reality. Carefully crafted statements were fed to the media in timed bursts. Appearances were rehearsed, interviews were pre-approved, stripped of anything real. The public didn't see Charles deteriorating. They saw a king painted in resilience. But inside those palace walls, the cracks were growing. Princess Anne, the stoic guardian of duty, saw the cost of the charade early. Alongside Prince William, she pushed back. They demanded transparency, arguing that hiding behind spectacle only delayed the inevitable. Their objections, however, were met with chilling resolve. Queen Camilla, standing guard over her husband's legacy, endorsed the plan without hesitation. For her, shielding the monarchy was not optional, it was survival. Silence, she insisted, was not betrayal. It was mercy. Yet even the most choreographed reality cannot hide the truth from those closest to it. Palace aides who had worked under 3 monarchs described disturbing changes. They spoke of meetings where Charles was physically present but mentally absent, his words slow, his gaze distant, his once commanding presence slipping away. These weren't isolated moments. They became patterns carefully edited out of all public-facing material. It was during one such moment of fading clarity that William snapped. The confrontation wasn't just between father and son, it was between duty and denial. William, having been fed years of half-truths, finally lashed out. He accused the palace of turning his father into a puppet, of rewriting a man's pain into palace propaganda. Charles, already weakened, could offer only a haunting reply: "If the people see me like this, they'll crown you before they bury me." That single line, whispered more in fear than defiance, would stay with William long after the argument ended. And then came the leak. A senior courtier, anonymous but clearly close to the center, released diary entries that detailed the panic inside. The entries described last-minute script changes, emergency image consultants, and internal debates over how much longer they could keep the act alive. One passage read simply, "We're painting over rot with gold, and even the paint is running out." The illusion was cracking not just for those behind it, but for T. He whirled, watching from the outside. But even the best-managed illusions begin to crumble when family fractures crack through the gold leaf of royal unity. When Prince William found out how deep the deception ran, he gave the palace one chance: tell the public the truth, or he would. What followed was a furious confrontation that ended in tears, slammed doors, and one line from Charles that haunted William for days: They'll crown me before they bury me. The tipping point came not from a public scandal, but from a folder William was never meant to see. It wasn't even marked sensitive, but inside it were travel records, treatment reports, and a revised medical calendar that obliterated the narrative being sold to the world. The real dates stretched back much farther than the palace had admitted. Charles had been declining long before his public duties began to scale down, and now William knew. Not because anyone told him, but because the papers revealed what loyalty had tried to hide. The betrayal was as personal as it was political. His father had been fighting in silence, not just against illness but against time, and the machine around him had decided that illusion mattered more than inheritance. William's demand was swift. End the lies, tell the truth, allow the nation to see their king, not the version sculpted by publicists, but the man who still bore the crown. He approached the advisors first. Their response was calculated, evasive. Camilla, when confronted, didn't flink. She stood firm in her belief that exposure would only hasten collapse of both health and institution. Her message was clear: stability first, truth second. But to William, this wasn't a matter of strategy, it was personal. And the more they resisted, the more convinced he became that silence was no longer an option. Princess Anne was the only senior royal who echoed his urgency. She'd seen the strain, the fumbled words, the quiet retreat of a brother once larger than life. Anne warned that if they didn't release the truth, the press would. "The headlines are circling," she said, "and we've given them blood to smell." Her words didn't just carry concern, they carried inevitability. And William, still reeling from the weight of what he'd learned, finally confronted the one man who had the power to change it all. What was meant to be a conversation between father and son unraveled into something raw and combustible. William, furious and heartbroken, accused Charles of letting the palace turn him into a myth. "You're not protecting the crown," he said. "You're erasing yourself from it." Charles, slumped and pale, looked up with eyes filled with something that wasn't weakness but fear. "If they know," he whispered, "they'll take it from me." The words hung in the air. William paced, his voice rising, demanding action. But it was Charles's next line that silenced him. "They'll crown me before they bury me." It wasn't resignation. It was prophecy. In that moment, something shifted. Not just between father and son, but within the fabric of the monarchy itself. What once felt unbreakable now felt brittle. The heir had gone to battle for truth, only to discover the cost of unveiling it might be higher than he ever imagined. And as he stepped away from that conversation, one thing was already certain: the days of silence were numbered. But even as William pressed for truth, someone else had already taken matters into their own hands and shattered the silence. He was chosen to protect the king's health and the monarchy's secrets. But when he realized the truth could no longer stay buried, one royal physician defied everything. His whistleblowing triggered a storm no one could contain, and he vanished hours after his statement leaked. For 14 years, Dr. Alistair Wynne moved silently behind palace walls. He was more than a physician, he was a confidant, a gatekeeper, and whether he intended it or not, a guardian of the monarchy's deepest vulnerabilities. He had seen sovereigns at their strongest, and now he had watched one fall. But what disturbed him most wasn't the illness itself, it was the system built to conceal it. As Charles's condition deteriorated behind smiles and rehearsed speeches, Wynne documented everything, not out of betrayal but out of conscience. It began with notes, then photographs, and eventually recordings. Hours of conversations captured on a secured device, some barely audible, others painfully clear. Charles's own voice broken and confused, Camilla pleading with physicians to delay just a few more weeks, and courtiers casually discussing how to hide what couldn't be cured. The turning point came when Charles underwent a secretive treatment outside the country, one deemed too risky for approval in the UK. The procedure failed, but rather than revise the public narrative, the palace chose to double down. A miracle recovery was staged. Photos were released. A scheduled walkabout was extended. The lie metastasized. That's when Dr. Wynne snapped. In a sealed envelope delivered to a veteran investigative journalist, he placed a confession letter, flash drive, and full chronology of Charles's medical history from the moment symptoms first appeared. It wasn't vengeance. It was a plea to the public, to history, to anyone who could still separate duty from delusion. The leak detonated like a precision strike. The journalist known for holding governments to account published excerpts with brutal clarity. Dates, dosages, denied outcomes. The story shattered the illusion, and within hours the doctor disappeared. Officially, he left voluntarily. But insiders whispered about sudden severance pay, emergency relocation, and a non-disclosure order signed under duress. The man who once stood beside the king was now a ghost, his career incinerated, his whereabouts unknown. Some believed he was protected. Others weren't so sure. Queen Camilla's reaction was immediate and intense. She was described by one witness as furious and shaken. Pacing the private wing of the palace, alternating between disbelief and rage. Not just because of the breach, but because of the betrayal from someone she had trusted in the most fragile moments of her husband's life. The palace communications team went into lockdown. All future statements were frozen. Aides were pulled into private meetings. Security protocols were restructured. But the damage had already been done. The world no longer believed in the official version of events. And now, with the doctor's truth out in the open, the monarchy faced its most dangerous threat yet: public betrayal from within the palace walls. As pressure mounted, Queen Camilla stood unmoved. Critics called it stoicism. Insiders called it silence born of guilt. She had known more than anyone, and now she was being blamed for everything. But behind closed doors, Camilla's fury would erupt, and her loyalty to Charles would come at a brutal price. The collapse of the official narrative didn't just expose Charles's condition. It exposed Camilla's role in shaping what the world was allowed to believe. From the start, she had positioned herself as protector, gatekeeper, and confidant. But now, with truths bleeding into headlines, her silence was no longer seen as loyalty, it was being called complicity. Rumors swirled through the palace halls with the sharpness of knives. That it was Camilla who had first insisted on minimizing the diagnosis. That it was she who had ordered key advisors to delay disclose. To spin hope from fragments, and to bury what was terminal in language that sounded temporary. The confrontations were no longer whispers. Princess Anne, already furious over the deception, confronted Camilla in a moment that shattered protocol. She didn't flinch when she called her a co-conspirator in concealment. Anne didn't speak with venom, but with clarity, accusing Camilla of prioritizing legacy over honesty and image over family. Camilla, caught between defensiveness and sorrow, offered no rebuttal. She simply walked away, and from that day forward, something shifted in her demeanor. She began to disappear from palace life, not publicly but emotionally. Her presence faded from strategy meetings. Invitations declined. Aides spoke of a woman increasingly isolated, wandering the corridors like a shadow. The queen consort, once composed and commanding, had become unanchored. But even in her withdrawal, the evidence continued to mount. Leaked documents tied her directly to the narrative management team. Drafted statements bore her handwritten edits. Talking points echoed her phrasing. The illusion had her fingerprints all over it. The emotional toll finally cracked through during a rare, unscheduled visit to the private chapel. Alone with Charles, now fragile and half asleep in a wheelchair pushed by aides, Camilla broke. Not with rage, but with regret. Witnesses later recalled the sound of sobbing echoing through the stone. For the first time, her role in the deceptio. N wasn't strategic, it was personal. She had tried to preserve his dignity, but in doing so, she had severed trust. And now, in the quiet of prayer, she was left to ask whether shielding the crown had ultimately failed the man. Camilla had always believed she could protect both the throne and her husband, that by controlling the story, she could hold back the storm. But now the storm was inside her, and with the world circling, she was no longer queen in control, she was a woman reckoning with the consequences of silence. Her loyalty had not wavered, but it had cost her everything: reputation, alliance, and peace. Yet the palace wasn't the only battlefield beyond its walls. The world had questions, and the illusion was beginning to burn. Once adored for resilience, King Charles was now at the center of a maelstrom of lies. Protesters outside Buckingham Palace chanted for truth. News anchors dropped euphemisms, even loyal supporters demanded clarity. But as pressure mounted, the palace made one fatal misstep, an emergency address that only deepened the crisis. What began as quiet suspicion quickly erupted into a national reckoning. Major media outlets, once deferential to the monarchy's carefully controlled messaging, began publishing side-by-side comparisons of statements and timelines, revealing alarming inconsistencies. The so-called fatigue that had initially explained the king's collapse now appeared in stark contrast to months of international travel, sealed medical visits, and ghosted appearances. One newspaper headline read simply, "The lie at the heart of the crown," and that sentiment caught fire. Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace and Clarence House, the silence that once insulated the royals now worked against them. Protesters, armed with placards and phone cameras, grew louder each day. Their chants weren't just about Charles, they were about trust, legacy, and deception. Online, the movement exploded. Hashtags like Palace Cover-Up and Where Ice the King trended worldwide. Users dissected old video clips, analyzing frame by frame every blink and smile. A viral thread broke down facial cues, spotting moments where the king winced, stumbled, or appeared lost, moments that were once dismissed but now looked painfully deliberate. And then came the statement. A hastily arranged emergency address presented not by the king, but by a senior palace aide. It was meant to calm the storm, to reassure the nation that everything was under control. But its delivery did the opposite. The language was clinical, hollow, and alarmingly vague. It acknowledged health challenges, but refused to give a timeline. It invoked privacy, but offered none of the humility that the moment demanded. Most devastatingly, it directly contradicted details already leaked, sparking accusations that the palace was still spinning lies in real time. What truly ignited the outrage, however, wasn't the content of the address, it was who wasn't there. King Charles was absent, and that absence was louder than any words spoken. His inability to appear, even for a brief, pre-recorded message, confirmed what many already feared. He wasn't recovering, he was fading, and the nation had been left out of the truth. All eyes turned to Prince William, who stood beside the aide during the announcement. His posture, his expression, his silence. They became a story of their own. Lip readers claimed he whispered a disagreement just before the cameras cut. Body language analysts pointed to subtle signs of strain. Some even suggested he looked betrayed, not by circumstance but by the palace itself. In the absence of a monarch's voice, the heir's discomfort became the loudest signal yet that the institution was fracturing from within. The fallout was immediate and unrelenting. International news outlets called it a communications disaster. Public figures began openly questioning succession, and behind closed doors, the monarchy's inner circle realized too late what they had done. By speaking, they hadn't calmed the storm, they had invited the lightning directly into the throne room. But it wasn't tea over yet, because behind palace doors, the king had made a final decision that no one saw coming. A letter, handwritten by King Charles just days before the collapse, revealed a man torn between legacy and truth. He didn't blame anyone, he simply knew. This was his final message, not to the nation, but to his children, and its contents would shift everything we thought we knew. It had been written at Balmoral, in the quiet isolation of the Scottish estate, where generations of monarchs had come to reflect, grieve, and make impossible decisions. The handwriting was uneven but unmistakably his. No seal, no royal stationery, just a folded page left inside a leather-bound journal that aides would later find untouched on the corner of his desk. The date was 3 days before the collapse, and its intended readers were not the public, nor the government, nor even Camilla. It was addressed to William and Harry, equal in salutation, though oceans apart in presence. The letter didn't start with formality, it started with exhaustion. Charles admitted that he was tired not just in body but in spirit. He wrote of regret, of decisions made under pressure, of long nights pretending strength he no longer possessed. There was no bitterness in his tone, only acceptance. He confessed to concealing the truth of his condition, not to deceive, but to shield the nation from another fracture. "I was raised to hold it together," he wrote, "even when I am falling apart. But it wasn't a goodbye, it was." "It's a reckoning." Charles explained the mounting fear he felt not of death, but of what might come next. He had lived long enough to know that the crown waits for no man. And yet he begged William not to step forward too quickly. "Don't let them rush you," he warned. "The throne is not a race, it's a reckoning, and you will need time to grieve before they let you rule." There was an undertone of sorrow in those words, not for himself, but for what he believed his reign had cost his sons, especially as they were forced to watch their father disintegrate behind a wall of silence and obligation. Perhaps the most haunting line was his last, a sentence that echoed not with command but with pleading clarity. "Let the truth out on my time, not theirs." It was a final grasp at control, an effort to reclaim the narrative that had spun away from him. In that moment, Charles wasn't a king. He was a father, a man, and above all, someone who understood that truth, once suppressed, returns sharper than before. The discovery of the letter was never meant to be public, but it didn't matter. Its contents reached those who needed it. It shifted how William viewed the final days. It reframed Camilla's silence, and it pierced through the noise of the palace's PR machine like a whisper in a storm. It wasn't a declaration of power, it was a quiet surrender to truth. But that time never came because the collapse changed everything, and now the palace had one final move to play. King Charles remains out of sight. The truth is out, trust is shattered, the crown stands, but the silence around its future speaks louder than ever. As the monarchy reels from scandal, one question remains: was this collapse the end of a reign, or the beginning of something darker? The days that followed were eerily quiet. No new photos, no appearances, no reassurances, just an unspoken confirmation that the king was no longer at the helm. Official statements referred vaguely to rest, reflection, and medical supervision, but the absence was not medical, it was symbolic. Charles, once the most visible monarch in decades, had vanished from the stage, and in that void, the institution scrambled to reassert itself. Prince William began assuming royal duties at an accelerated pace. Public engagements were added to his calendar with striking urgency. Handshakes, hospital visits, quiet sit-downs with foreign dignitaries, all carefully photographed and pushed out across the palace's media channels. But no matter how composed he appeared, something in his eyes betrayed the pressure. He wasn't just stepping forward, he was walking into a storm his father had barely escaped, and the weight of that truth was visible with every move he made. Behind closed doors, the palace launched into full-blown damage control. Communications teams worked around the clock. Crisis managers reviewed every pie. CE of content, every speech, every headline. But the tide had already turned. Public trust had taken a blow too deep for spin to mend. The monarchy's most guarded truths had spilled into the open, and now every silence was read as strategy, every appearance judged against what hadn't been said. The illusion of invincibility had been broken, and once broken, it doesn't return. The cracks weren't just domestic. International headlines grew more brutal by the hour. From New York to Nairobi, the global press questioned whether the British monarchy could still hold moral authority after deliberately misleading not just its own citizens but the world. Words like opacity, manipulation, and decline dominated front pages. Even traditional allies of the crown began to distance themselves, reframing their commentary in more critical tones. And yet, amid the fallout, a strange scene played out. Camilla and Princess Anne, so often at odds, so rarely seen together, were photographed in quiet conversation, walking the gardens at Windsor. There were no smiles, no formal gestures, just two women, once divided by loyalty and silence, now united by aftermath. It wasn't a statement. It was something else, an acknowledgement of what they had both lost, and perhaps what they had both tried to preserve in different ways. But the final image that would define this chapter didn't come from a press conference or leaked report. It came from within the palace. A private, unscheduled moment that aides late. Leaked anonymously. William, alone in a drawing room once used by his father, standing in front of a fireplace still framed by Charles's last official portrait. No crown, no crowd, just legacy pressing down on the man who now had no choice but to carry it. The story isn't over. The crown may still gleam, but the shadows it casts have never been darker. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.